Welcome to the first pre-concert talk. Those talks were originally meant for more of general public, so the people who will listen to the concert later, to get to know with the music, with the pieces. But as you can see, just the familiar faces. But luckily, I kind of prepared for that type of situation. I kind of anticipated that might happen, so it won't be a complete improvisation, just a very open score. Perfect. But let's anyway start with more lighter themes. For both of you, this is the third year collaborating with the Abeceda ensemble. How did this relationship with the institute, with the ensemble, develop since you first started? Do you compose any differently for the ensemble now? Do you notice any difference?
And that question is to
both of you.
So we, James, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I was, oh gosh, that was three years ago. I was 21 at the time, and so I think just my ability to like meet with people and to learn more about like what each instrument physically can and cannot do, but also to learn just more about each of you individually as people has changed a lot about like how I write for the group. Not everyone strike that. I mean, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to be able to know the people who you're collaborating with and with whom you're writing music, and I really value that type of relationship and community, because I think I think it adds essential ingredients, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just going to say the exact same thing as James, which is that it's a totally different thing to write for your pals. Mm-hmm. You know, it's such a much more beautiful, intimate, wonderful thing. And just as an example, this year, you know, my string quartet, Las Ventas, is a monster of a piece that you couldn't give to, you know, four folk you didn't know. They would, you know, it would be offensive to give that piece if you said like, yeah, okay, this is what you guys are playing next week. But when you develop when they're your friends and you know what, I don't want to say can get away with. See Urban looking at me through there with his. But when you know the amazing, incredible, almost things that people are possible of like breaking past warp 9 into that other very special region, you can take risks that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. I suppose that's one thing. Another is I suppose the sense of long term. I should say a different type of time. So, I mean, remember last year even, Urška, we were talking about my pieces about negation, mm-hmm. which went on for what, like 4 years?
Yeah,
about, I've done maybe only one other thing that lasts across that kind of, temporal stretch. And it really allows you to look at something in a totally different way. Mm-hmm. Because we're always, you guys know this, we're always like, we get a commission and you got 10 minutes of music in which to look at something, right? To do something for 4 years is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing privilege. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. I have this one.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes. So I'm also gonna use this opportunity to tell a little bit something about both of you. So first, Alastair, to make you a little bit uncomfortable.
Oh, wonderful, yeah.
I'm just going to read it. So Alastair is a Scottish composer and writer. His work is characterized by a lyrical complexity, which has been described as a whole exciting new genre of art by the BBC Radio 3, and also as an attempt to challenge long-held assumptions about the material world and to eliminate the performative nature of matter itself by the opera today.
Sorry.
That's what you wrote in your CV.
It's terrible, isn't it? Like,
no,
it's something quite different to have your own bio read back at you. It's like
yeah, that's why I'm doing it.
Like a form of punishment. What deep dark circle of hell is this?
Notable projects include the fashion opera cycle of Wear, Robe, Woad and Rune, a documentary opera, A Boat in an Endless Blue Sea, a Scots-Jiddisch cantata, The Drowning Shore, and Capital, the first opera that was performed in the metaverse. Alastair is a recipient of a series of new music awards. Here I sorted it a bit. He teaches composition at the University of Surrey and holds PhD in music from Goldsmiths University of London. That's a recent thing, right?
That's a recent thing, yeah.
He's a member of the editorial board of Classical Music magazine and publishes and speaks internationally on his research interests, which includes the theory of contingency dialectics and its methodological implications in fashion opera. So let's stop here.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words.
Yeah, you wrote them. So contingency dialectics, I think this is the thing you maybe didn't mention that much in your lecture, and that might give an additional context to the matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think what is a contingent dialectic is essentially just a dialectic that is unresolved. What's a dialectic? A dialectic is a contradiction. A contradiction that impels something forward. And I suppose to put many thousand words into a nutshell, we experience life discreetly nowadays, right? We will. Even before this, perhaps we were all scrolling on our phones on Instagram and seeing this story, that story, this story. When we experience time, we experience it discreetly, right? When we work at maybe some of us are full-time composers. If you are, raise anybody? Yeah. Hey, Darcy, yes, woo! So, yeah, amazing. Okay, well, that derailed. Exactly. But we all, I suppose, survive under conditions in which we have to become multiple things in our lives, right? So we go to our job between 9 and 10. We compose between 10 and 11. We socialize between 11 and 12. And this is a type of clock time that existed since maybe the 18th century, 19th century, yeah, since factories, exactly. The time of the factory. Yeah, sorry, James. Just wanted to...
Oh no, yeah, factory-built time methods. That's very close. Wow, the microphone. The main point I think is relevant there is the way we experience time as a result is commodified. Is the main point. Your time is not your own. You're paid. Even if it's salaried, you're paid according to a number of hours. And one of the wonderful things about music is that, yes, you have a set amount of time to create something and to collaborate on something, but it's not just, this is a piece meant for consumption. It's meant for shared creation. You know what I mean? Which I think is... Yeah, please, more on contingency dialectics.
No, absolutely. James explained it far much better than I could have, which was that, you become alienated, right? Time becomes no longer yourself. You get cut into different pieces. But the contrary, the other side of that is that this allows us this way of seeing the world that is actually, paradoxically, much closer to what material reality is, which is a world of contradiction and discreteness. If you go to, again, we don't know, but modern physics tells us if we zoom right down into the matter of the Earth, it's not linear, it's discrete. And if we look at the way that time moves, it's not linear, it's not discrete. If we look at the way that causality moves, it's not linear, it's discrete. And so I think that means that we need to update the idea of the dialectic into a contingent dialectic, into instead of being a romantic Hegelian idea of a synthesized paradox, into something that is two things at once. Compositionally, that means, again, sorry, answer is probably going on for too long, but compositionally it means that the idea would be that instead of what you might call, I suppose, an interpretive or hermeneutic paradox, like you get with Shakespeare, should we stick? let's take Antigone. Let's go way back. Yeah, so something like Sophocles' Antigone. Two different people watch the play. You know, like a young radical and an old conservative. And the young radical identifies with Antigone, and the old radical identifies with Creon. And this is a wonderful thing. This is like why it's such a great play. It's built into the play itself. It's a part of the play, but the paradox is only interpretive. It exists within the play itself. What a contingent dialectic means for art is that the play could be two things at once. It could be the tragedy of Antigone, which can be interpreted by the conservative and the radical differently, but it could also be, say, that stack of chairs, you know, or this computer, or this glass of water. It would be an ontological rather than a hermeneutic paradox, which is something quite different. It's more difficult to do that in almost any other art form apart from music, which, well, yeah, I've talked for a while now. Just I'd sum that up by saying music is a lot more slippery than other things. You can build structures into it that exist, like multiple structures that through various forms of interpretation people can see it, like seeing in the moon both the rabbit or the man, but it can be both at the same time. Sorry.
No, completely. Just to add on to that, I think the idea of like how we find plot in music and how we construct plots in music is something very like applicable to this conversation, because, you know, within some contexts you listen to a piece and you say, okay, if I were to transpose the idea of a plot onto this, which many people do, are the instruments characters? Sometimes. Are they actors? Sometimes. Are they collectively representing one sensation? Sometimes. Are they collectively embodying some sort of experience? Sometimes, you know, the logic of each individual piece is determined by each piece. The emotions as well, the entire character is determined by each piece. And I think within that freedom comes a really unique and wonderful ability to like know someone, both the composer someone and the ensemble, the performer someone, in a new like fingerprint sort of way, where I don't know, it's a window into a viewpoint or an experience that no one else could have possibly come up with, you know? And I think that's special and very connecting and very against alienation in a way that just really resonates with me. You go to a gallery and you're able to see what people occupy their lives with, yes, but also what is central to them, what is so important and precious to them. And it's meaningful.
Okay, so speaking about the dialectics between something that is completely prescribed and then something that is more open, free, can we talk about the different approach you have to the scores, to prescribing the music to the performer?
Yes.
I'm talking about 3 of your pieces. So
Yes.
on one hand we have the Las Ventas and then Little Green Hill,
Yes.
which are completely prescribed.
And also
And
completely
very
unprescribed.
detailed, but then you have the instructions that says that performer can change anything.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, there's composition 1, which we at first thought it might be improvisation, but now it's clear that it's not.
Yeah,
So.
This is a very good question, and I have the answer to it, and I'm just gearing up to it. Okay, let's go. So if if you want something to be entirely sorry. Do you guys ever know this? Sometimes you have these like arguments in your head that are like parts of a computer that you need to access, and like this is a particularly difficult one. It's one of my central methodologies. Contingent dialectics. There are 4: plurality and eminence, structure and contingency, atmosphere and integrality, and autonomy and intervention. And so this is contingency, structure and contingency, which is the idea, I suppose, to sum it up in a very basic way, there's always this tension in music between what is allowed and what is defined. And that each of these paths, if you take them to the logical conclusion, run into a huge amount of problems. This, as we're in Slovenia and near Ljubljana, the psychoanalytic words would be, the hysteric and the neurotic, right? There's the hysterical experimental tradition and the neurotic, say, modernist tradition. And both of them are insufficient. If you take for instance, the only way to so a lot of my work is I would define as being transcendental, or an attempt at transcendentality, in the sense that the only reason that art can be in our society political is if it rivals and overcomes the given structures of perception that we're presented with, right? So that's what we were kind of talking about earlier, about like the lecture earlier. That there are given structures of being. There are choices with which we are told that this is all you are ever going to have. It's happening, next week in England. There's going to be an election between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, two very evil men who support in almost every way, like deep, deep evil. And their argument, both, is that this is all there is. That's it. That is the limits of morality. Pure evil, Just this and this. Evil. And and if you believe anything else, you're some kind of nutter. You know what I mean? And that is absolutely unacceptable. So the only answer to that is some form of transcendentalism, right? If you go down the path, for instance, the modernist answer to that was of creating something different. That's Adorno, right? That's Boulez. That is creating a different world outside of Sunak Starmer's malbolge of awfulness. There's another world that we can create. I can build this piece out of things that don't exist within this situation. And this can overcome that, yeah? So that's what we would call, within this dialectic I'm talking about, structure, yeah? The problem with that is that this always contains itself as its own limit. So if you take Boulez's piece, if you take even somebody like Ferniho, who is, pushes this to the massive extreme, he says still that wrong performances are possible. And so the score contains itself as its own limit. Now, a limit is needed to rival these things, otherwise it just dissipates into pure experimental hysteria, right? But as soon as you have a limit, you're back to the square one of you are just back at the this and that, right? So we're at an impasse here. Does that make sense? So I know this is I understand this is quite complicated. It was quite complicated for me to find in my head. So tell me if you're not following. The only way, therefore, you can't also go to the experimental tradition where you divest yourself, because that just leads you again back to this, If anything's permitted, this is permitted. This cannot be permitted. It's impermissible. It's awful. Reject it. So we're at a complete impasse. The only way I can see is the total erection of structure, like a structure so complete it can rival that, except that limit that defines it. And so you remove that limit. And that's what the thing at the beginning of the score says. So all of my scores, usually, even if they're exceedingly complex, say you may change anything. And that's what that is, the removal of the limit, the total divestment of everything you've worked for. And to me, and that is, it's not both as well, it's as well. So it's a contingent dialectic between structure and contingency. It's, to me, again, not entirely satisfying, but it's the only way I found through that impasse, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, by the way. It's
So just to tell a little bit more about the composition one, because it's really, score is something completely different that we were used to work with as an ensemble. So the score contains your research that you presented at the lecture.
Yeah.
And then there's a set of rules of how to approach the score, how to approach the rehearsals a little bit. And then there's a story.
Yes.
Was this story originally meant to be a part of the score?
So there's
written with the purpose?
Yeah, there's a novel. It's a research project, a score, and a novel altogether. Yes. I didn't give you the whole novel because I'm not a total sadist. But there is a the reason is because there needs to be, not to go too much back into what we talked about earlier, there needs to be a symbolic framework that you're working with. It doesn't really matter what the symbolic framework is, but like the composer of the Paleolithic composer who we're trying to, bring back again, would have had their own symbolic framework, right? And so we need to recreate our own. The easy way would have been to not, choose another novel, but that's being lazy, this kind of gave me the impetus to write the novel. Basically, there was a novel I wanted to write for a long time, and this gave me the reason to write it. And they are connected. They're connected in the sense of being about this idea of grief and loss that the past represents. That the past is a abattoir of whether it's historical or personal. It's an awful, awful thing that we trail about with us constantly. And yet, when you look into it, it gives you access to both, not just yourself, but everybody else, because they also trail it with them. And so one of the main themes of the novel is the fact that you can see, it's the main character is a person who, because of a traumatic incident, can see the past everywhere, as though it were a physical thing. It has nothing to do with the Paleolithic, just his own personal past, but the thematic thing is still there. And most of the writing is also about landscape, which is important for it. But it was kind of a confluence of things at once. I've been wanting to write this novel for a while, and when I realized there needed to be a novel in the score, I was like, well, you better just write it then.
Okay, so my last question is in reference to what Ingrid said at her lecture. She was talking about all these nets of references that you can have inside your head, that you can build for yourself, but then at the end, what's on the surface is the sound you produce. So I was wondering, because this was actually the question we as a group were discussing a lot, because we were not sure, or there were different opinions of how much we should be aware of the sound we're producing. So the sound that comes to the audience, that people will listen to. So I'm wondering, were you also thinking about that when preparing the score? Did you have anything specific in mind, either to how we will approach the rehearsals or how we will approach the sound result?
That's such a good question. It comes down to, I suppose, something that separates me from a lot of my peers, which is that I don't believe really sound exists, not in an aesthetic sense. And I didn't actually realize I realized this until recently. I was talking to somebody, and they were speaking about how a lot of my work was, gimmicky or, involved different, like so many different types of stuff. And I was like, no, it's all the same. I honestly didn't understand. We're talking about like doing a documentary with these kids and doing the fashion opera, doing this, and I was like, it's all this. And I realized it's because, I suppose for me, maybe it's because I come from, I don't know, maybe I didn't come from a musical background. I come from a background of literature, in the sense that to me sound is always something that signifies. And I think you believe that too. I think we all believe that. I think sound is very much like a tactile, bodily experience, but compared to so much else, and particularly the way in which we do it, I think symbolism is, at least, I mean, you say this is a terrible thing, isn't it? You say, I think you all believe this. It turns out actually you're thinking a different way. But I think even when sound is purely sensory, in the sense that perhaps pure techno is, right? That's it comes to mind as the one thing that I can experience that would be, when it's just and it goes on for 4 hours. That's about as far as from symbolism and into, pure sensuality as you can get, right? Even then, it's performing such a symbolic function within our symbolic world
and physical and social and communal and completely.
Sorry. No, but I think all those things are ultimately symbolic, and that there are corporeal experiences we have all the time. I'm not sure how much music is one of them. You know, stepping out a deep breath of air. You know, like jumping into that lake. A panic attack. You know, all of these things are very different to something like music, which is far more within the symbolic web. Even maybe types of music, like, you know, a piece of an accordion played on the street, heard, you know, through with the smell of a hot dog vendor. You know, then we're into something different. But like in anything that is, you know, has the symbolic mediation of a stage, it's very difficult to see it as anything other. And so that's why I think that it will ultimately be signification, and that the sound, whatever it is, means something else, like a word. If that's a fair enough thing to say.
Yeah, of course.
And what do you think, Urška? I should ask you, as a performer, how do you what do you think? What is your experience of the piece been? Because really, I haven't written anything at all. I wrote an essay, a novel, and seven instructions. You've really written the piece.
Yeah. Since we're talking about the sound result, it's very difficult for me not to be concerned about it. Yeah. As someone who's trained to listen,
that's the absent composer's privilege, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what it sounds like.
When it sounded very hard for me to listen to, like at some rehearsals. And I had this urge to correct it, you know, to not let it be this hard for the listeners.
Yeah, well, that sounds like it's going to be the perfect piece then, because that's, I don't know. Well, you're not asking me a question. We get on, but like the only time you ever know that you're on the stage of something real or something good is when something sounds absolutely dreadful. Or if you read something and you think, oh my God, what is this? It's like that old David Bowie quote. I think about it all the time. You know, you got to swim just out to the point that you can't feel the thing anymore. I don't know if that's what you meant though. Maybe.
I don't think so, but okay. Anyway, let's go on with James, your CV. Now it's your turn. So James Pecore, a genre-blending composer, dramatist based in Manhattan, New York. James loves telling stories with music, and he loves the magic that art can create between us. As a musician, he uses musical theater and chamber music to blend various genres, stories, and traditions into one coherent piece. The son of a carpenter and a nurse, as well as the little brother of an art historian, James sees music as a way of walking together with both our past and our future. As a composer, James has studied music composition and orchestration at Columbia University, as well as musical theater, playwriting, and literary analysis. Fractured yet tactfully arranged together, James Pecore composes music as a mosaic, beauty coalescing out of brokenness, purpose out of pain. So this is like heartbreakingly beautiful. And when reading this, I was once again reminded by the one thing I said to you when we were doing the interview last year, if you remember, that one thing that every time strikes me when listening to your music is the beauty that's inside every piece. But all of your pieces are so different.
Yeah.
But again, each of them has the same idea of beauty in it. So I was wondering, is beauty the one thing that you seek in music, or that is like the fundamental truth of your music?
I would
maybe something
Yeah,
else?
I wouldn't say so necessarily, because I think when people hear the term beauty, they may end up projecting certain ideas of what a sound or theatrical or musical experience should be into it from their traditions, from where they've grown up, from a lot of different things. And I think that there's many forms of beauty in terms of experience. I think there's beauty that can be terrifying. I think that there's beauty that can be so subtle and soft and delicate. I think that there's beauty that can, I think that, so I think that beauty, I don't necessarily think about beauty. it might be a byproduct of a process, but it's not the...
Just my subjective
I mean,
seeing of it, like my individual reading of it.
I appreciate that. I mean, I like pieces that encourage a lot of introspection and encourage people to think about their experience and how they relate with one another and how they relate with themselves and emotions and archetypes and stories throughout history and novels and media and other things. So I think beauty often comes from the process of reflection on where you find meaning, and I do try to build that into everything, regardless of if it's an experience, a piece that might be musically quite dark or quite difficult, as in the string quartet 2 Rain that will be performed later this week, which it's a piece I had to write, or that had to write me, but it's not, it's very physically and emotionally difficult to wade through, and it's a piece where I feel that if the audience feels that they must leave, or that they don't want to listen to it or don't want to experience that, they're free to step out and but it's a space for a lot of things, and beauty can be one of them, but beauty means a lot of things.
Can I just also make a point of James's piece from, what was it, 2 years ago? The accordion and the flute, which is, if you go to a lot of contemporary music stuff, you have a pretty high threshold for weirdness. Sometimes I'm just walking around and I remember that is the most out there thing I've ever seen. I don't know if there's a video of it, but please watch it. It's incredible. What was it? It's about somebody changing into something else?
Yeah. It's about so it's based off of the Ovid's Metamorphoses, as well as Kafka, the turning into a bug. It's called it's Dragonflies. Oh God. There's I can't remember the full title. No, you're fine. It's one of those pieces where it has the flautist speaking through the body of the instrument, and performative laughing from the body of the accordion, like laughing through the body of the accordion. I think that, I think we've gotten to a point where, this connects really well with the second string quartet, or at least this movement of it. I don't know if there will be more. Oftentimes throughout music history, various artists and composers from a lot of different traditions will sing something, will play something, will set something, and then add elements of a certain emotion to try to color it, to inflect it. Puccini has melodies where it's beautiful, but he adds in elements meant to emulate crying, or emulate death or withering, or any number of things. And I think that an interesting exercise is turning that on its head, beginning with the act of crying, beginning with the act of laughing, beginning with these things, and then wondering how, what sonic environments can result from that. Because we as human beings have such physical human languages, and I don't know, I think it's a potent room for exploration.
Yes, you also mentioned in your program notes how music is the integral part of every society, of every important event, like birth, death, marriage. Yet somehow we often hear how music, especially contemporary classical music, has lost touch with its audience, and that it's losing its audience. Do you think this is a bad thing, or it might be the privilege, so that we have the audience who actually cares about the music, even if it's a small audience?
Could you repeat the question or clarify it a bit? Sorry.
So we often hear that contemporary music is losing touch with general public, that it's elitist or separated. Do you think that this is a bad thing, something we should work to repair to make it more accessible to the general public? Or do you think that this might also be the privilege, so that we have the audience that actually cares and comes to listen and to work to understand?
I think so. I think there's room. So I think that there needs to be room for a wide variety of experiences musically. And I think that musicians need to be able to self-actualize as composers and as musicians, and to fully flesh out the quality of sound and the quality of relationships with their instrument and with one another as instrumentalists and as composers and artists. And I don't think that all of that music will be accessible for a wide variety of reasons. I mean, one, like, we all have different experiences. We have different physical bodies. We have different brain chemistries. We have, we do not share one mind, one experience. And I think that's a good thing, mind you. I think that's so essential to the human experience. I think that there will be pieces that people find accessible and pieces that people don't find accessible. But I think that the act of empathy, I think the act of trying to explore beyond one's experience and to understand is essential to us as human beings. Politically, emotionally, socially, it is the building block of everything. And I think that, I think that, not everything has to be for everyone, but it can be nice giving people doorways into your work to understand, oh, this is why this person cares about these perspectives, these relationships, with whatever tradition they're writing from.
Maybe just one last question about your cello concerto that will be performed today. It was written especially for Urban. Did you collaborate in the process of preparing the concerto? So how is this music different because it's written especially for Urban? If I'm asking. No, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I got it. Thank you. I had the joy of meeting Urban and the ensemble several years ago in person. And it's one of those pieces where, many groups could and can physically perform it. But it's Abeceda's fingerprints align with it the most. Like, it's interwoven, it's it's like it's so meant for you. The previous piece that Urban performed, taro milk tea from a couple years ago, yes, it involved a ritual of a tea ceremony where Urban brought tea from his home, from his family, and ended up brewing it and drinking it and reflecting on it, and then playing the piece with the experience of the tea in mind and the sensations of it and the memories of it. And I had the experience several years later of sitting at a cafe. So after that concert, I had the experience of sitting and listening to the bells of St. Nicholas Cathedral in Ljubljana. And I discovered a bit later that my partner, Darren, with whom I've been for 3 years, which is an absolute joy every day of my life, his mom is Slovenian descendant. So his great-grandparents were born in Slovenia.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I had this crazy experience of, having heard those bells and having this moment of, oh, not only do people listen to these bells and it's the sound children play to, it's the sound people marry to, it's the sound where people experience so much of their lives in line with that sound, even outside of religion, even outside of, but also, my partner's descendant from people who married to those bells and everything. So there's there's just an incredible gratitude for abeceda and for, you know, Slovenia and Ljubljana and Bled and the culture that you've created within that sound. And you know, I think so much music is about searching for universal truths. Definitely agree with that. And I think one universal truth is an experience of yearning for the sublime, for connection with nature, the universe, the cosmos, and sublimation. I don't know how to put it. Direct first-hand experience with all that can be, that is so beyond us and yet which we are connected to. And I think, you know, when you see a partner who you haven't seen in a long, long time, when you're reunited, that's an experience of just the bliss and the connection. And when you hear the bells of home and you know, I think it leaves a sonic imprint of just the sublime and reflection on how you're connected to the people around you. So I wanted the piece to be grounded in that. And a cool thing about the sublime is, you know, it's the bells feature in the piece in the form of electronics, but they're not, you know, they're bells, they're natural. So the overtones, it's, you know, it's not a perfect major chord. It's whatever that means. It's, yeah, and it's about bathing in the experience of, you know, longing for home, longing for the people where you're in a community and alongside, and finding the complete joy and fear of losing it, and also awe upon getting there. If that makes sense.
Yes.
That was the most moving answer ever. I nearly burst into tears, James.
I
did it already. I already did when I was reading his CV. So
I get emotional about it too. I don't know how to.
You have a way of talking about it, man. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's incredible.
So thank you both so much for these words. I think that we will listen to the pieces differently now, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Urška. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Always.